Hello, this is going to be a video on determining whether a compound is ionic, covalent, or an acid. This becomes very important, especially in naming, because we use different naming rules, whether it's ionic, covalent, or an acid. But really, deeper than that, it's really important that when we look at a compound, its formula, we know what type of compound it is and what types of bonds are involved. So you have this overview in your notes, or you will have it in your notes, that goes over kind of the three main types of compounds that we've learned about in class. The first one, which we spent all Unit 3 on, was ionic bonding. This is where we have a metal and a non-metal. So this is something that has a metal from this side of the periodic table, bonded with something that is a non-metal on this part of the periodic table. So in that instance, there is a losing and gaining of electrons. The electron is transferred from the metal to the non-metal, and this is when we get ionic bonding, because after you get that transfer of electrons, you have an ion that's positively charged, an ion that's negatively charged, and that the attraction between them is the ionic bond. When we name ionic compounds, remember, we're just copy and pasting the names of the ions that are involved. So you would take the name of the cation, and then you'd take the name of the anion and put them together, and that would be the name of the compound. So don't forget how to name ionic compounds. That would be first. Covalent, which is the newer one in Unit 4, this is when we have nonmetals. So this is only elements from this section of the periodic table bonded to other elements in this section of the periodic table. And that involves a covalent bond, which could be either polar or nonpolar, and it's a sharing of electrons. So when we name those compounds, we have to use those prefixes that we talked about in class. Let's see if I have the table of prefixes here. When we have covalent compounds, we use our list of prefixes, adding these before the element to say how many of them we have. Okay. So the reason we need prefixes for these is that we have no idea how many of each atom would be involved. The reason we don't need prefixes for ionic bonding is that we know the charges. So if I say sodium chloride, I know it's going to be 1 sodium and 1 chloride because that's how many of each I would need to balance the charges. All right, so prefixes are not needed for ionic compounds, but they are needed for covalent compounds. All right, and then the last type of compound is acids. And at this point in the game, the only way to identify acids for right now, before we have our acids and bases unit, is just that there's an H in the front of the formula. So these should be the easiest to recognize, but sometimes students will get caught up in this versus this, and they'll forget about the acids. So whenever there's an H in the front of the formula, at this point, we'll name it as an acid. And remember, to do that, we had special acid naming rules where we have kind of 3 different types. We have to use the name of the anions. You have to be able to recognize, use your ions list and recognize the anion. Some of these anions end in "ate", some of them end in "ide", and some of them end in "ite". So depending on the ending of the anion name, you name the acid according to these rules. Okay, so there's videos for all 3 of those things, so you can watch those videos if you're unsure about how to name them. But this video, what I want to focus on, is just recognizing and categorizing the compounds in one of these 3 categories. So I have a list of just some random formulas that we will put into their correct place. It's either going to be ionic, covalent, or acid. And from there, you could name it using the correct rules. But all I'm going to do in this video is just identify what it is to get you used to that. So the first one, we see SCl4. So this has sulfur, and then it has chlorine. Both of those are nonmetals. So that tells us, if it's just nonmetals, it's covalent. So this is covalent. All right, next one has phosphorus here and oxygen here. Also 2 nonmetals. So they are also covalent. So when you name these 2, you would have to use prefixes. Okay, so I'm not going to do that in this video, but if you needed to name it, you would have to use prefixes because they are covalent. All right, the next one, Fe2O3. Look, Fe, iron, that's a metal. So this is a red flag here. You have a metal, that means it's ionic. Once you have a metal, you know it's going to be ionic. And ionic compounds are named using your common ions list. So all you would do was copy and paste the names of the cation and the anion. No prefixes. Okay. The next one, NaBr. Again, Na, sodium, that's metal. Once you recognize that there's a metal, you know it is ionic. So again, you would copy and paste cation, anion name to name this compound. Okay, SO2, sulfur, nonmetal, oxygen, nonmetal. This is two nonmetals, so covalent. We would need prefixes for that one. MgCO3. Mg is a metal, magnesium, so ionic. Okay. This one. There's an H in front. H2S. The H is in front here, so that tells us, at this point, that tells us it's an acid. So since we have an H there, this is an acid, I would have to use the acid naming rules to name this. I'd have to go back to these. Okay. NCl3, nitrogen, nonmetal, chlorine, nonmetal. This is covalent. Use prefixes for that one. And we have HNO3. Look, starts with an H. That means it's an acid. H in front. You would use your acid naming rules. And the last one, H in front. Acid again. All right, so again, I'm not naming them in this video. You have 3 other videos you can watch to figure out how to name ionic compounds, how to name covalent compounds, and how to name acids. But all I'm focusing on in this video is how do you figure out which one of the 3 it is. So hopefully that helps. Please let me know if you have questions.